So the day that we've all been waiting for is finally here. And I don't mean by what's going on right now. I really hope that you guys are staying home and safe, but it's more along the lines of technology and notebooks. So what I have in front of me is the ASUS Zephyrus ROG G14, and it features AMD's Ryzen 4000 series Zen 2 CPU. That's right, Zen 2 has finally made its way into the notebook space. Now, we're already aware of its outstanding performance on the desktop platform, but how does that translate into notebooks? Most importantly, how does it tackle important factors like battery life? Well, the G14 is something a bit different for AMD notebooks, since it's being put out there as a premium, slim, yet super powerful laptop that's supposed to represent the best Ryzen has to offer right now. Now, ASUS is targeting the G14 towards the premium gaming market, and that's actually a pretty big deal because in the past, AMD notebooks were relatively affordable, and while they offered acceptable performance, they did sacrifice on some key areas like the overall build quality, and things just didn't feel that right. But the G14 is taking a complete no-compromise approach, and that's amazing because in the past, at least for a really long time, Intel used to be dominating the high-end notebook space. So after all the hype, does the Ryzen 4000 series have what it takes to compete within the mobile market? Let's find out right after this.
The Razer Huntsman Tournament Edition has arrived. Its linear optical switches are rated at 100 million keystrokes and actuate at just 1mm. That gives it a lightning-quick feel with no risk of debounce delay. Let your fingertips appreciate the double-shot PBT keycaps with their extra texture and enhanced durability so you can always dominate your game. The Razer Huntsman TE keyboard. This is gaming at a speed of light. Learn more in the links below.
Okay, so let's quickly talk about how AMD was able to translate their Ryzen 4000 into the notebook space. So I covered a lot of the details back at CES. In fact, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about them, you can check out that video right over here. I'm going to be focusing on the H series since that's what's being used on the G14. Now, for those of you wondering, the H series processors is really the higher performance parts from AMD that's really targeted towards gamers and creators, whereas the U series is really more towards the thin and light devices that are later coming on to the market. So right now, AMD will be launching 8 and 6 core variants, and all of them have SMT enabled, creating 16 and 12 thread CPUs. There have been a lot of questions and confusion about the differences between H and HS names, so let's put that to the rest. So HS is design specification used by AMD to create notebooks with a thickness of 20mm or less, more than 10 hours of battery life, and a discrete graphics card. To achieve that, CPUs like the Ryzen 9 4900HS in the Zephyrus G14 are simply lower TDP versions of standard processors. But unlike the other HS series, the 4900HS also makes do with lower boost and base clocks. Another thing I want to mention is that AMD made some pretty odd decisions on the connectivity front. So with the desktop CPUs, we're aware that Zen 2 does feature support for PCI Gen 4, both on the graphics and the storage side of things, but these notebooks don't support that. In fact, they're back to Gen 3 with these new notebook processors. And that's kind of unfortunate because you're only getting, or AMD is only allocated 8 graphics lanes for the discrete graphics card, which shouldn't really cause any bottlenecks, but it would have been cool to at least see support for Gen 4 NVMe drives, at least on these new notebooks, but that's not the case. Supposedly AMD did this to boost overall efficiency, which I guess is good news if you really want longer battery life. Okay, so you might remember the G14 back from CES as the notebook with the fancy LED matrix display on the lid. Unfortunately, the model that I have over here doesn't feature that, since ASUS will be planning to launch that matrix model a little bit later in the year. In fact, it's a specs packed inside that got me really excited. So it's got the new Ryzen 9 4900HS 8-core CPU with 16 threads, 16GB of RAM running in a dual channel mode at 3200 MHz, a 1TB NVMe SSD, and a 14-inch 1080p 120Hz display, and an RTX 2060 Max-Q GPU. All for less than $1,500.
Say what?
That's right. At least that's where things stand right now, but that could change given the current situation that's going around these days. In fact, the G14 starts at about $1,000 for the GTX 1650 with a Ryzen 7 4800HS processor, and it goes all the way up to $2,000. That high-end version has essentially the same specs as the model that I have over here, but it adds that matrix LED display with a QHD panel at 60Hz. So with all the specs out of the way, let's get into the exterior impressions, and I really like what ASUS has done here, guys. You can pick up this notebook with either a dark gray or a white top cover, and it's refreshing to see something different from ROG instead of the traditional red and black theme that they're known for. Build quality is really good. The entire chassis is constructed out of magnesium alloy, topped off with a coating that resists fingerprints, and it sure does a trick. Love this feature, and it's very thoughtful of ASUS. I also like the fact that you can open the notebook with just one hand, plus the keyboard tilts at an angle to optimize typing, and it helps with airflow. And for those of you wondering about the CNC holes on the lid, don't worry about liquids getting in and damaging the components because there's a secondary backer to prevent that from happening. I really like this design. In fact, weirdly enough, it does provide a bit of a grip when you're holding this notebook, so it's really nice. I should mention that the color scheme isn't consistent throughout the notebook. The lid screams pure white, whereas the keyboard and the trackpad area is a silver finish. It overall looks like a razor blade mercury white finish, just without the white keyboard. But putting the G14 next to a previous generation Ryzen notebook like the Zephyrus G14, I still remember that off the top of my head, you can see that ASUS kept the overall design look, but they've modernized it a lot, and that's something that I love about the G14. I'm really impressed with the size of this laptop. It's smaller than my Razer Blade 15, so you can easily throw this into a smaller backpack and not worry about the weight because it only weighs less than 4 pounds, and the included power adapter is also fairly lightweight too, so nothing to worry there. In fact, this notebook, it's only about 17.9mm thick, which definitely fits the HS specification, and like I said, I'm really still shocked at how much ASUS and AMD were able to cram inside such a small chassis. It is really, really impressive. Moving on to the keyboard and trackpad, you still get the same layout just like any other Zephyrus notebook with the ROG fonts on the keycaps, dedicated volume adjust keys, along with quick access to ROG Armory, which is a software that lets you switch between 3 different performance modes. I really wished if there was an additional mute key, since that would have been more consistent instead of relying on function for just that command. I like the separation with the arrow keys. It makes it easier to navigate through spreadsheets. The power button also acts as a fingerprint reader. Appreciate the subtle implementation there. The keys themselves are excellent, with good tactile feedback and adequate amount of travel distance. It reminds me of the ZenBook 15 that I looked at not too long ago. The backlighting, on the other hand, though, is the worst that I've come across on a notebook. It's just almost impossible to read the keys at night, especially when you have it during daylight. You're actually better off disabling it completely because ASUS seems like they went with micro LEDs instead of the center-mounted system underneath the keycaps. I guess that didn't really turn out that great. Now, ASUS did confirm with us that they're going to address this issue with the mass production units. Now, the trackpad, on the other hand, is phenomenal. It features a glass surface, feels very similar to my Razer Blade 15, and it features Windows position drivers. Now, typically with every other notebook, I would switch right away into the webcam quality test, but there isn't one on the G14. In fact, yeah, it's just completely, it's not there. And I guess I can't complain about that because a lot of people seem to not care about having a webcam on their notebooks, so I'm just gonna skip that part. The speakers on the G14 are front-facing, so you get 2 tweeters at the top and a couple of woofers at the bottom. And this results in one of the best sounding notebooks that I've ever come across. I'm serious, guys. The trebles are well defined. In fact, the sub underneath really adds a great depth to any genre that you're listening to, and this outperforms my Razer Blade 15 by a long shot without losing clarity at max volume. Moving on to the I/O, it's really good for a 14-inch notebook. I mean, on the left-hand side, there's power in, HDMI 2.0, USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C with DisplayPort 1.4 pass-through and power delivery. Now, just to clarify on that power delivery, this notebook can only accept 65 watts over that Type-C port, but also do keep in mind that it does limit the performance of the laptop. If you really want to take advantage of the RTX graphics and the Ryzen processor's full potential, you definitely have to use the 180 watt included adapter. Unfortunately, ASUS does not include the Type-C power adapter. It's just a standard one that you get. Switching to the right side, there's a Kensington lock, a couple of USB Type-A ports, but sadly, those are Gen 1 5 gigabits per second instead of Gen 2, which is twice the bandwidth. It's really weird to see ASUS cut corners, especially in the spec department, because this is AMD's latest offering, especially on the notebook front, and not getting that up-to-date spec is frustrating because most of the Intel notebooks in the market do feature that. Now, I do have something that I also want to bring up, and that is the port location, because you might notice, or you might wonder, that I have a mouse sitting right beside me. If I plug this in on the side, I, for one, am definitely gonna end up bumping into that cable every once in a while because it's so close, and I'm sure it's gonna end up being a problem. Now, I really don't know if I can blame this on the design of this laptop, because ASUS definitely had to make room for, ventilation and the heat sink to breathe. So it's really just a design limitation, but I thought that was something worth bringing up. I should mention that there are no Thunderbolt 3 ports on this laptop, but that's expected given that Intel still hasn't licensed that to AMD yet. Now, moving on to the display, it's 14 inches, 1080p IPS-like, not necessarily true IPS. However, it does come factory calibrated and Pantone certified, meaning that they claim to cover up to 100% of the sRGB color range. From our testing, this notebook only covers 95% sRGB and 75% DCI-P3, which isn't too far from the Blade 15. You can definitely get away with photo and video editing on this notebook. The view angles are excellent as well, but unfortunately the screen doesn't get that bright, so viewing content outdoors is definitely going to be a challenge. I didn't notice any backlit bleed on my sample. Overall, for the price, I really can't complain about this display, guys, because it's running at 120 Hz. Gaming on it was absolutely amazing, getting that fast, fluid response with the discrete graphics card. Really, I mean, you can't go wrong with this screen. When it comes to upgradability, there are a couple of things that can be tweaked on the G14. So when you look at the memory, you only have access to a single memory slot, which is already populated because this laptop comes with 16 gigabytes of RAM, 8 gigabytes is onboard memory, so that means you can only expand this up to 24 gigabytes. And there's a single M.2 slot that's already populated with the Intel 660p SSD that unfortunately doesn't have the greatest read or write performance. Now, the battery life on the G14 surpassed my expectations. You see, when you take a 76 watt-hour battery and combine it with AMD's Zen 2 power-efficient processor, you really get a laptop that can last you all day. As you can see with our light load test refreshing Chrome on a loop, our sample lasted for about 9 hours and 30 minutes. Guys, that is Ultrabook level battery life coming from a gaming laptop with an RTX 2060. It really goes to show how well AMD has improved its power state selection with these new processors. Fascinating stuff. Now, under heavy load, it only lasted for about an hour and a half, which is right on par with the other gaming laptops that we've tested. And now, the moment that you've all been waiting for, performance. In one word, it's just fast. Like, really, really fast, guys. In fact, these numbers would make Intel cry, so if anyone from Intel's watching this video, you better have a box of Kleenex handy, because it's about to get real. So jumping right into our standard synthetic tests, starting with Cinebench R15 and R20, the 8-core 16-thread Ryzen 9 4900HS is a good 50% faster than Intel's 6-core 12-thread i7 9750H. And what's even fascinating is how well it outperforms the Core i9 9980HK 8-core 16-thread processor that's on the Aero 15 OLED model that I tested last year. Something I should mention is that the Aero 15 OLED was returned to Gigabyte, so you'll only see it in the synthetic tests. Single core performance is very impressive as the clock speeds boost up to 4.3 GHz as per spec, and it's just as good as Intel's offerings. Switching to more real-world tests, this Blender result says it all, folks. I mean, it took half the time to complete the render compared to my Blade 15. This is desktop 9900K level performance, guys. Those extra cores do come in handy for video transcoding as well. As you can see with our Handbrake test, the 4900HS is just way too fast for Intel to keep up with. Moving on to DaVinci Resolve with exports, it's really interesting to see how those 4 extra threads managed to close the gap between it and my Blade 15, featuring an RTX 2080 Max-Q, but keep in mind that the G14 features an RTX 2060 Max-Q and Resolve loves GPUs. However, if you're an Adobe Premiere user, I'd stay away from this laptop because it doesn't feature quick sync support, which is an Intel exclusive feature, and Adobe embraces that for accelerated rendering. Now, about this WinRAR test, a lot of this has to do with the SSD speed along with the single-threaded performance. Well, that Y740 from Lenovo has one of the fastest SSDs we've seen on a notebook, and it also has really high clock speeds, so it literally kills everything else here. Alright, so switching to gaming, as you can see with these 3DMark benchmarks, the G14 does pretty well for having an RTX 2060 Max-Q, but it is a different matter when you're actually playing some titles. So first of all, there's a known issue with Tomb Raider. and NVIDIA and ASUS are both working on it, and we did get confirmation with that. But in other games, it's pretty evident that ASUS is limiting clock speeds to remain within their thermal specs. It's important to remember that this is a slim and light notebook, but there's also a way around these limits by using the turbo mode. More on that later. Taking a look at temperatures, the CPU did shoot up to 96 degrees Celsius under a full multi-core workload, but after a few minutes, the clock speeds did throttle down to 3.3 GHz, maintaining 71 degrees Celsius. The RTX 2060 ran pretty cool too. I think the max peak temp that I saw was around 70°C, which is pretty respectable for a 14-inch gaming laptop. Even with relatively low component temperatures, the surface temperatures were pretty high, especially at the center of the keyboard and directly on your lap. Now, for those of you wondering, ASUS has implemented 3 performance modes on this notebook. So you have silent, performance, and turbo. I ran all of my tests in the performance setting because to me, it looked like the optimal setting. Now, when you take a look at the performance difference between all 3 modes, silent really limits the CPU performance, and the benefit of it is that you get a relatively quieter system, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for gaming as it applies a significant power limit on that RTX 2060 Max-Q. But there's a catch. There's always a catch when you see these numbers that are just so great. So the G14 unfortunately is not a silent or a quiet gaming laptop because the fans ramp up significantly when you put it through a gaming load or anything that has to do with rendering or any sort of multi-core workload. So I guess this brings us to the conclusion. And guys, I am still shocked at the performance of this G14 monster. I mean, the fact that it completely destroyed my Razer Blade 15 in all the tests, I mean, Blender, Cinebench, even Resolve in some cases when you set it to turbo, it just outperforms that laptop with an RTX 2080 Max-Q. That's just crazy. Most importantly, this is a gaming laptop with a battery life of a thin and light. Like, how amazing is that? AMD has certainly caught up with the best that Intel has to offer, and this is huge news. And of course, added competition is great. Now, are you making any compromises with this notebook? Definitely. I mean, yes, the lack of a webcam can be considered as one. The backlighting isn't necessarily the greatest, and I'm not really a fan of the I/O placement. I really wished if there was a Type A USB port on this side, because having just 2 Type A ports on this is definitely a bit frustrating. But for the price, it really is amazing. You see, right now we're seeing a slim view of what these new Ryzen processors can offer, and I hope to see a lot of other Ryzen laptops perform to the level just like the G14. I should also mention that this is the HS series processor and not the fully spec'd out H processor, so it's a lower power state. So just imagine what that fully spec'd out H series processor can perform and what it's going to be compared to Intel's upcoming Tension series. It's going to be an interesting one to definitely witness. And that's it. That's all I have to say about the G14. I hope I was able to cover everything that you needed to know about AMD's new Ryzen CPUs on notebooks. In fact, if you're looking for a fairly small, compact gaming laptop, would this be on the top of your list? I would certainly consider this because of the performance, but I want to know your thoughts about the G14 in the comments. I'm Ibor with Canucks. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss out on new videos. And I'll talk to you guys in the next one.